What's up, everybody? Back again for an esoterror podcast. And today we are doing a follow up on a comment that we received, as we said that any comments we receive for a subject that somebody would like us to do. Our comment was from one of Delane's friends by the name of
Lane.
And so Lane had requested that we do a deep dive on Die Glocka, which is a Nazi Germany technological program of a flying bell sort of UFO kind of craft. And we're definitely going to be kind of skirting the outer edges of this subject as to what it is that we're familiar with. But after having gone down a couple of rabbit holes, we realized that this is going to be sort of an introduction as to what it is that we are familiar with. And then we are later going to curate and do a Dan Carlin-esque sort of coverage on the subject because there are just far too many things that interest the both of us. Hitler's interest in Antarctica, the Spear of Destiny, the Lance of Longinus, or when he had that mandrake root around his neck like he was Flava Flav with a fucking clock. And so we're going to be doing a play-by-play deeper dive into all of those later down the line, and we'll keep everybody updated as to when we're going to be able to release what I think is going to be probably our very first professionally done episode as opposed to the sandbox sort of approach that we've been taking thus far. But in the meantime, Delane is currently suffering COVID, as I know that yesterday was rough for you. So we're just going to be kind of shooting the shit and taking it easy on the subject of Nazi and occultism. But yeah, man, how was it yesterday? Like, you got tested positive with COVID, and it sounded like you were having a real rough time.
Yeah, definitely not feeling good. Feel better today. Well, it's like the third day since I've had symptoms. So we wanted to do a podcast yesterday. I definitely wasn't feeling it, so we're doing it today. As I guess we're getting started. Yeah, so forgive how I look. Definitely feeling under the weather. And my voice might sound like it. There's some things I want to correct from some past episodes, with learning a lot of information and having a lot going on. Sometimes you mix up information, and 2 points I want to correct. One from the last episode when we were talking about the Kabbalistic tree of life. I mentioned the deity Mithra, and actually it's Ahriman. So they're the two pillars of severity and mercy. Severity is represented by Ahriman. Mercy is represented by Lucifer, because Lucifer in occult is a dual being. And Ahriman is the Lord of Darkness and Chaos and the source of human confusion, disappointment, and strife. He's from the religion Zoroastrianism, which is from Persia. He's the reason why they called him Hai Shaitan in the Hebrew, which means adversary. So the Luciferian path is more like the light bringer. And next point I wanted to correct was when we were talking about Aleister Crowley, and this kind of a little bit ties into our subject now in a way. He learned at the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and the place I was talking about that he built with the vibrational resonance and frequency to do his spells and his ceremonies. It was at the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, where he built in Germany, and he campaigned for the war effort in Germany most of World War I.
Yeah, and as we were talking earlier, Zoroastrianism has always stood out to me as what I believe to be one of the oldest recorded religions that we have a record of. And you had corrected saying that it certainly is one of them, but that it was also predated by the Vedic. Right. And so the Vedic it was the records of the progenitors of everything from Buddhism to Hinduism. And it was like a large red-haired, pale-skinned people that had moved from west to east and had seeded all of those areas with Hinduism or Buddhism. Whereas I think that probably the way that I had heard it is that Zoroastrianism was going to be, if not the oldest religion of an agricultural people. And so it is maybe the first record that we have of a religion for people that had just begun to build civilizations, as opposed to religion of a nomadic peoples, i.e. the Vedic.
Yeah.
And a lot of that ties into Nazi occultism, which again, we're not carrying water for fascists here. It's a touchy subject because of the way that our current empire views one of our antagonists, like in history and everything. Like everything associated with Nazism is evil. If you look at the swastika itself, that's actually one of the most potent and important sorts of symbols that you could use. As you were saying, it's the North Star, and the way that the North Star spans out in the sky with the bigger little bear, Ursa
The major.
and Minor, or the Big and Little Dipper. But across a bunch of different cultures, everybody had a symbol of the swastika. From the Navajo had it, the Hopi had it, Hinduism has it, the Japanese had it, and it just got completely turned on its head because of a bunch of mean bastards that were trying to take over the world back in, the 1930s to 1950s.
So let's start with that. Let's go with the Brillia because and lead into the Brill Society because without any of that, you don't have the Wonder Waffas, which were I guess that's a wonder weapon. It also means the universal solution, miracle weapons. So the Brillia, according to the belief of the Brill Society, is they're the people descended from Atlantis, and the Brill Society, they were members of a group, the Brill Society, that considered themselves descendants of these people who came from Atlantis. And in 1917, they shot some kind of rocket which put them on the map. And 1923, they did another one which made them the Universal Space Program, basically, for Germany at the time, which is what led Hitler to them for developing these Wunderwaffes. There's where he found von Braun. Von Braun was part of the Brill Society. And so Vril, the word means life-giving elixir is what it has been tied to. And getting into that with the Wunderwaffes, the request made was about the Die Glocka specifically, which is the bell. So like Adam said, we're going to talk about it in a way to the best of our knowledge, because there's no way of proving or disproving that the bell was there or not. There was blueprints found, but we never actually found the bell. There is an article, and I can't remember the year, and I wish I would have looked that up before the episode, but we were talking about it in Pennsylvania, where the bell landed, and the people who seen it, and there was newspaper articles about it, they said that it looked like it was a silver shape poured in a thimble mold made out of mercury with no welding. There was no putting it together. It was all one single solid piece. The military came, loaded it up on a flatbed truck, and it was never seen again. And so the bell, rumor has it, was going to be like some sort of a time machine, right? Because who could go into the future and bring weapons back to the past could control it. They did develop, however, other weaponry like the V1, the Vengeance missile, or and forgive my German, the Vergeltungswaffen, which meant vengeance weapon. It was the first cruise missile. They said when there was silence, then you were to expect a catastrophic event to happen. And
Storm.
These things would cut out in the middle of the air and not make a sound. So it'd be really silent death dropping on you. Led to the V2 rocket, which was the first long-range guided ballistic missile. And 3,000 of them were launched in the war. They weren't even put into production until after September of 1944. And 9,000 lives were cost by these 3,000 missiles. 12,000 lives and laborers in the concentration camps to build these missiles. Then you have the V3, which Hitler was trying to get off the ground, the super gun with 25 gun tube that was going to be sunk into incline tunnels, and it was going to bombard London at 600 shells an hour. Led on to the Panzer VIII Maus, which was 27 tons, 33 feet long, 5 ordered, 2 were built, 128 millimeter gun. They had issues with the engines, but I mean, we can all agree that was a kind of hell of a tank, were the Panzers.
Oh yeah. Like German engineering in terms of the war effort, like they were just so brutal with all of their machinations. We still talk about German engineering today, as it held true then, as it held true in World War One. It always stands out when you talk about the terror of silence that any German war front would always impose upon the battlefield. Is it's kind of talking about the same thing as they had that mega gun in World War One that Dan Carlin talks about in or Blueprint for Armageddon, and
Yeah.
about how they were launching that thing from Berlin and hitting Venice with it. And people had no idea what were happening because they didn't hear the shot. They just looked up and saw like a clock tower disintegrating in front of them from the impact. Like they weren't able to hear it. The release of gas during World War One was such a silent killer. And then the invention of the cruise missile, which I believe the rest of the world adopted. It was new technology invented by the Nazis that is ubiquitous across the field of war today. We hardly use any conventional missile that isn't a cruise missile at this point.
Yeah. So, I mean, shout out Dan Carlin. The Blueprint for Armageddon, amazing, amazing. It's what, a 6-part series, almost
I mean,
6 hours each episode.
I like Wrath of the Khans a lot, but I really think that Blueprint for Armageddon is my favorite.
Yeah, it's
There's
one of
just
them.
so many amazing points that he makes in that one.
Yeah, so and I know we're concentrating on World War II, but there's a lot of stuff that happened during World War One, and I mean Hitler was a part of it. And so I guess getting into a little bit of that, Hitler, when he was in the war and they were beaten, because he gained a war hero status. He was awarded a medal that a lowly soldier would have never have gotten for his courageous actions in war, right? So this was his ability to lead people, and from there he was taken
Yeah.
to the Fool Society after the war and introduced to people, and he found out that he was a good orator, and that's how he ended up becoming molded, I guess, into the dictator that he ended up becoming. I mean, after his time in prison. But they tried to, I think they tried to overthrow the system at one point, the Thule Society, and tried to implement their beliefs, and that's why he was imprisoned, where he wrote Mein Kampf.
Mm-hmm. There were a lot of occult societies in Germany. Like Germany had so many different occult societies, and once Himmler came into power, and this is where it gets interesting because the way that I interpret the rise of Hitler is that some other body in Germany, like the real SS or the real Nazi Party, they saw Hitler as like, here's the face of the agenda. We get this guy, we put him at the head, he's the figurehead, and we're the ones that are turning the neck of the head. I definitely think that Himmler was certainly one of the foremost of those, that he finally realized that they had their Ronald McDonald to their fast food brand that they were going to sell the world. Yeah, I forgot exactly where I was going with that point.
So I guess I'll continue on with that. With Himmler, he, I think, is tied into what the real society became later on, because when the war ended, the rumor has it that real society went to Antarctica and took their UFOs and technologies, because there was what was called the Foo Fighters. And what was it, British pilots and I think French pilots were reporting that they saw these silver, yellowish glowing orbs that were flying, and they called them the Foo Fighters. And it was believed that the Vril Society was working on things like Die Glocka and many other anti-gravitational type weaponry or aircraft. So Heinrich Himmler, though, he went on to be founder of the colonias in South America that you still can't have access to, those German colonias.
Yeah.
And rumor has it that he was alive. So speculation is that Adolf Hitler didn't die in the war either, and that when General Admiral Byrd had died after Operation High Jump, when they went down there to discover if the Nazis had a base or not, it said that Hitler took over for him. And I seen a newspaper article at one point, I can't even remember where it was, but they were saying, and they showed this picture of this guy, and his face was shaved, but he looked exactly like Hitler, and he died in 1984 in South America. I think it was Chile. Or Argentina.
Yeah, Argentina, I think, is the largest population of outspoken Nazis this side of Ukraine, Ukraine being the largest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about the esoteric societies that they had in Germany, it's like once the SS got off the ground, it was kind of counterintuitive and surprising to see that the SS actively closed down a lot of these societies, which kind of spoke to them going their pure Aryan Nazi prerogative and everything, but I think what it speaks more to is that they inducted all of it and then just made it more secretive. And so it was out of these, like kind of taking them all under one umbrella, that you began to see projects like the Die Glocka, being Die Glocka is ubiquitous and synonymous with the Foo Fighters. When other people saw the UFO and they described it as a Foo Fighter, that was what they were reporting as to be a Die Glocka, right? Like Die Glocka was the flying bell UFO, yeah. It's really difficult to find any valid information about it, but I remember years ago I had seen some portent of a deep dive for it, and it was saying that it had some kind of the energy core was a system of slamming mercury around in an orb to the point that it would achieve like a certain velocity that it could maintain or change its mass to be able to move the way that they did.
Yeah, they were saying, I heard on a documentary on the History Channel that with the anti-gravitational technology that they were using and the mercury they had in it and the way they were doing it, that the aircraft could stop facing one direction and turn 90-degree angles without
Yeah.
even turning in that direction. And they could do it in less than a split second. And so, I mean, are they called the Vermanas, the in the Hindu culture, right? So that's what the bell was described to look like, the Die Glocka,
Yeah.
kind of like those crafts that they had in the uh I can't even think of the name right now. The origin of like the whole Hindu gods and stuff. The aura. I can't think of the name right now.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what gets tricky is that you get into so many of these words that sound so much alike. Like you have the Vedic and the Vril, or you have Hitler and Himmler. Everything just becomes a big tongue twister, and so it's probably good practice that we practice as many German words as possible.
So about the bell, though, there was a rumor. So the day that the Allies had liberated the camp that the bell was supposedly contained at, the troops said that they saw a flash of light, and it was said that they were trying to experiment and trying to get it to go because they was nearing the end of the war and the Germans weren't looking too good, and so they were trying to get this up and running. And when the Allied troops had liberated the camp, they saw this flash of light, and the supposed bell was never found. The 12 members of the Vril Society were never seen or heard from again, and only thing we found were blueprints of this bell, and that's why we believe it may have existed at some point.
Can you think of when this occurred in relation to Project Paperclip? Would it be before or after?
It would have been before.
Okay, yeah. That's interesting because you would think that maybe even after Project Paperclip, they maybe got their hands on the raw blueprints and evidence of these things when we had inducted all of those Nazi scientists, right? And founded NASA.
To be honest, I think at this point von Braun might have already come over prior to that, or this might have been the moment that he did.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that. Von Braun, his whole thing was he wanted to go to space, and when developing the weaponry for Hitler, and creating, like, he used hydrogen and stuff like that to carry the missiles farther, right? Which was a liquid fuel, unlike what we were using before. It's what made his rockets different, and it's still the technology we use today in our rockets.
Yeah.
So he wanted to do more defensive type weaponry, but Hitler didn't like that because Hitler only wanted defensive weaponry because according to Hitler, if a weapon was too defensive, then it would show that you were losing the war. And mind you, the Germans were pretty futuristic in World War One and World War Two, as far as the whole world's concerned. But he had a choice. He could either surrender, he and his team, to the Russians, or they could have surrendered to the Allies, which he chose to do because he wanted to carry on his dream of going to space.
Yeah. Here's Mike Mignola's Hellboy the Conqueror Worm, which is hands down one of my favorites that talks about Nazi esotericism a lot. And this isn't von Braun. This is Ernst Oeming, who was another weapons developer for the Third Reich, as Mike Mignola alludes to. He was probably the nearest scientist to have given them the bomb. Yeah, physicist Ernst Oeming, probably the scientist of the Third Reich, often referred to as the Nazi Einstein. And this is a man that they sent his corpse into space to talk with, like real cosmic horror entities and stuff. It's a great book. Everything that Mike Mignola does is fantastic, and he's incredibly knowledgeable about the esoteric in a way that not a lot of people are.
Yep. And so with that, I also had a comic book reference. I guess I wanted to tie into that because Adam and I were talking about it, how everything's hidden in plain sight. And you have Captain America, and it was in the Winter Soldier, which led into, a big thing that's still ongoing because they still haven't resolved the whole Shield thing in the movies necessarily. That's why they're getting into that secret invasion with Nick Fury. But Captain America, you had what's his name, the German scientist that was Arnim Zola.
Yeah.
They basically preserved his consciousness, and he carried on Hydra into the existing government, right? So what Hunter S. Thompson was saying about America becoming the Fourth Reich after the World War II, through Operation Paperclip, it's definitely a high possibility. And I mean, that movie's showing you that they infiltrated the system underneath us and re-manipulated the system to be what they wanted it to be. And Hydra wasn't a German organization to begin with. They were Japanese. And he sent Baron von Strucker, the Satan's Claw, to go and kill their leader and take over Hydra because he needed an organization outside of the Nazi party because he knew Hitler's direction wasn't going to be the same direction he wanted to go. And so Hydra, that's where they come from, but being manipulated by Red Skull and Baron Strucker and Arnim Zola.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty interesting to me just how often these ideas show up in popular culture that people are so familiar with in terms of Marvel to Hellboy, and just how much it resonates with people is that I think that most everybody is familiar with the kind of woo-woo spooky shit that the Nazis were all about. Like they were actively seeking the Lance of Longinus because as the Spear of Destiny, whoever wields it is going to have, godlike power over the whole of creation. They were sending expeditions into Tibet to just speak with the monks there and maybe be granted access to whatever libraries that they had of ancient knowledge. Like the two are so tied together in terms of like you have the radical fascist, Aryan, xenophobic Nazism, and that is almost inseparable with this very esoteric and occult consideration for who they were and what it was they were trying to accomplish, which again factors into Admiral Byrd and Operation High Jump, is that his reporting when he flew to Antarctica, and Operation High Jump was to investigate any Nazi activity in Antarctica in the first place, right? That was the
guise that they were under, but there's the belief, and that's in my belief that they went down there to find out if there was in fact the firmament.
Right.
Now, we were talking about
he reported firmament and hollow earth, which was interesting because as like a U.S. war hero, basically everything that he reported under oath really corroborated with the more peaceable kind of esotericism that the Nazis were into. I mean, you can't just say that they were 1,000% evil. They were 1,000% evil, but there was like a 1% carryover where there maybe was some validity as to what Admiral Byrd had reported in terms of, firmament, hollow earth entries, ancient temple ruins.
To the hollow earth, that's where the Brillia supposedly are, the light beings and stuff inside of Argatha, right?
Yeah.
Inside of the earth. And so tying back to the beginning point with Polaris and Ursa Major. So at the 4 seasons, Ursa Major with Polaris, if you look at it in all 4 seasons, it represents the swastika, which I believe is the X marks the spot for true north, which was the Axis Mundi, which is where it was said Hermes Trismegistus, thoughts went to commune with the gods, right? Teleporting to another dimension through the tree of life at the true north. And at the south, there was an entranceway into the hollow earth, which they thought the Germans had found. So that's why the guys, they went down there, right, to discover that. But with him shooting missiles into the wall and stuff, which I believe were nuclear missiles because the Antarctic Treaty was signed, which said that no country could make claim on Antarctica until the year 2047, 100 years after this treaty was formed. So that's what leads me to believe they may have shot nuclear missiles down there for the radiation, you know?
Yeah.
But Adam and I were talking that there is a pyramid down there. Prior to this podcast, we were talking about it, and I can't remember what it was called. I remember seeing things about it before, and I tried to look it up. I thought it was called Base 721, but I couldn't find anything on it other than like actual military bases in Arizona. And so there was a video I was talking to Adam about where it's showing military guys jump out of the back of a helicopter and they're landing on a pyramid.
Yeah. Which is interesting, and I think we covered it before, but our mutual buddy we went to college with, Maynard, shout out Maynard, he was at Chichen Itza on the spring equinox, and I have a picture of his that's on classical film, physical film, and you could certainly see that there is like a helicopter deploying military personnel onto the roof of Chichen Itza during the spring equinox. There's certainly something that they're very interested in when it comes to these subjects. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, and I was going to say, see, so I was letting you finish your point, but there we go. If the viewers can see it as well, there's the swastika. It forms in all 4 seasons. So what I believe
the symbol comes from, yeah.
I believe it's pointing to true north, right? Because where they tell you the North Pole is, it's not the same as ancient maps. Obviously, because Tartaria exists in ancient maps before 1958.
Right.
Was it 1954 or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Before NASA's foundation. So Tartaria, the North Pole, it all looked different. And I don't even believe if you were to try to find it that you would be allowed to go there. But true north is where I believe the point of Axis Mundi is.
Okay. And so I'm trying to corroborate here. I always get it goofed up when it comes to astronomy, but the North Star is Polaris, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I always get that.
And so because of this is why I think ancient cultures embraced the swastika symbol.
Yeah.
And X marks the spot, basically, right? Because that's where mythologically or in historical fact, depending on what your perception of it is, that other beings that we considered higher to us or even people who gave us wisdom, that's where they went to commune with the gods and come back down and give us this knowledge or the all.
Yeah, this is interesting. The swastik in a Sanskrit word meaning auspicious, in the Indian tradition, a clockwise figure is called a swastika, symbolizing prosperity and good luck. The counterclockwise symbol is labeled as a savastika and is used in tantric practices only. In India, it has always occupied a central position in arts, culture, and rituals. So it's just a shame that one of the largest takeaways that we have associated with Nazism is always going to be associated with that symbol that predates a lot of our records of the existence of culture in its first place. We have always been witness to that machination in the heavens of the cycles of the very seasons itself around Polaris, the North Star, and now all we see is a red, white, and black fucking flag signifying genocide.
Yeah. So I wonder if you could bring up a picture of the Axis Mundi, Adam.
Yeah, take a look.
Could have a visual reference of what I'm kind of talking about.
Is that MUD or MUNDEA? MUNDI.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got.
So this is where the Tree of Life is supposedly hid away at. And it's at the spot of the Tree of Life at True North, where they go, and it's like a dimensional portal. There was a video that came from the Russians, supposedly from the space station, showing True North, and it has this freaking circle that's so weird. I think we shared a picture of it on the Gentleman's Bureau. I've seen the video one other time. I wish I would have recorded it. Maybe I do have it on my phone, but
let's see. Here's kind of like an overview of it. Nah. I'm just seeing like a lot of old, really poor images and such. Simple Axis Mundi architecture. Am I still screen sharing?
No, you're not sharing any. It's still showing. It is still showing, but it's showing Ursa Major.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Somehow I opened a different window.
Yeah, there you're sharing it now.
Yeah. So there's this one, and it's like a small, very poor image.
No, and that's all we need right there because that's what it's been described as in
Yeah.
historically, and also like the flat Earth grid. The representation, and it has as above, so below, as you see with the orbs.
Right. And so for any non-flat earthers, they kind of break it down as to how a lot of these ideas, it doesn't really matter if you're, hardcore flat earther or hardcore globe earther. I think that there's like a lot of information that we could share together is that really the only reason that people have visceral reactions to round or flat earth is just the difference in what kind of propaganda that they are wary of. Whereas the globe earthers are all about science, and they will scream science until their dying breath, and because they see church as the ones doing the propaganda, they see no separation between church and state, and so that's why they believe in globe earth, whereas flat earthers see science as the propaganda of the state, and so they perceive things in a flat earth. But ultimately, I think that one of the things that people could come together regardless is just understanding propaganda regardless.
So the main reason I believe that they did that, okay, to have us arguing over this in the first place is, and let's not get away from the main point here, like for the debaters of flat or globe earthers, is this is the true point. The reason why they created this discussion between us, why they changed it, is to hide away true north and the South Pole, what's going on in
Yeah.
Antarctica. You know what I mean? And these are the true reasons why they created all this fighting and bickering between us, is they were hiding these things at the true north and at the where maybe there is a hollow earth, maybe there is a base or there is people over there. That's what they hid from us with all of that knowledge.
It's always, yeah, the divide then conquer, which is interesting because the actual quote is divide then conquer, not divide and conquer, which really is like minor semantics, but words make all the difference when it comes to these subjects, and it certainly makes all the difference of people getting wrapped up in the minutia of a subject when it really doesn't make a difference if the earth beneath our feet, it doesn't change our experience, the shape of what it is. Like having conversations as to, I think, digging up the dark, evil skeletons of Nazism and then trying to have a discussion about what it was that really captured so many hearts, souls, and minds of the poor bastards that were just following orders. What was it that appealed to them, and what were the modus operandi that they could execute that made it so functional? You can't just throw out all of that experience and just say, well, everybody was evil, even if they didn't know it. That's not how fascism works. Fascism happens from the ground up.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't really say that they were all necessarily evil. There's people that were doing what we consider evil actions as far as the party goes. But I mean, with that, because I can't necessarily blame the Vril Society for being part of Nazi Germany when they were kind of absorbed into it. It's just like the Thule Society is what became the Nazi Party. And I mean, what one man's agenda, I agree that they went along with the action, I guess, right? But
Yeah.
it's like you said, it's a touchy subject because how do you say that somebody's so completely evil? Like, that's our reference of what evil is. But
Right.
if that's what our reference of evil is, know that there could be a greater evil and there could be a lesser evil.
Or a completely different evil, like
Yeah,
it could be, like a friendly faced corporate CEO, and everybody is like, look at that guy, he's completely boring, he is the most like milk toast non-violent, non-threatening, boring kind of a guy like Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks could be the devil incarnate, but because he is so suburbanite and he's so like the everyman that everybody would always just say like he's just a regular guy. He loves his typewriters. He has like a lot of his outreach to children programs and whatnot. And it's like, well, just because we define everything to be evil as Hitler like, which is what everybody was saying about Trump, is that Trump and Hitler really don't have a whole lot in common except for the fact that they are bombastic old white assholes. But at the end of the day, it's easy to get again lost in the minutia and not be able to redefine new facts as they emerge.
So, and for the viewer, I just want to clarify why we're actually getting into this discussion, because this is the Esoterror podcast, and this has to do with one of the Hermetic principles, with the principle of polarity. Because with evil and stuff, the best way I could describe it is hot and cold. They're the same thing, but varying by degrees. And it's the same with good and evil. You have an adverse to one side, and they vary in degrees. And the reason why they're called the Hermetic principle, or the Hermetic principles made it into the universal laws, is because the term hermetically sealed in science actually came from the Hermetic principles, because they're so perfect. It's why it ended up becoming universal laws. So you can't argue the facts of the seven Hermetic principles. It is really hard, and this is with science or with faith.
The idea that you can't argue against Hermetic principles is interesting because you can, but that's not what true argument would be, is that you could get your emotions to factor into it and just say, like, I don't want to believe in it. But if you actually go about it in a more mathematical, logical way of taking principle A applied to principle B, then you actually can't logically detract from them in true argument. And that's another one of the wordplay issues that we have, is that usually when you think of an argument, it's two people that are being very emotional screaming at each other. Like that's what an argument is. But like the true definition of argument is being able to ascertain logical, not absolutes, but logical summations of whatever it is that you're applying against itself. In which case, yes, like Hermeticism is logically irrefutable in what it does. And it speaks about things so simply that Aristotle was very capable of, right? Like Aristotle could lay down truths and facts, A is A, and there's not really anything else that you could do with that unless you are no longer meeting him where he lives in terms of the conversation, right?
Well, I mean, according to the Rosicrucians, right, to not believe in the Hermetic principles in some way, or to try to believe they don't exist, that's in direct effect believing in the principle of cause and effect. I mean, and we live in a dual world. You have the principles of duality, the principle of polarity. And I mean, again, I want to get into an episode of the seven Hermetic principles where we break them down more in a way that does them justice.
To get like a dry erase board or something, or like a blackboard and chalk or a projector, and just like, bow, lay them all out for folk.
So what I mean by that is that they're the universal laws, because like you have the principle of gender, for instance. It doesn't have to do with sex. It has to do with the masculine and feminine energies and creationism. So in order to have creation, you can't have it without the masculine or feminine. But I guess if you believe in the Gnostic beliefs, you can, because Sophia, who gave birth to the demiurge by herself, being the effeminate energy, basically made a brain dead god who, according to the Gnostics, created us. And that's why humans are having such a hard time living, because they believe that a divine God would never create a life like this. But on the other hand, that's why I lean more towards the Rosicrucians, because they all gave us this dual reality. So there's a duality in all of us. And I was listening to Alan Watts again, and the shadow, right? It's the inescapable part of ourself.
Mm-hmm.
But the shadow, it could be just like a human. It could be caring, or it could be like possessive, angry, and forcible, right? Awesome. Bringing up the seven Hermetic principles.
Yep. Yeah, and in that particular order, it really does begin to build a structure. You know, back in the day, a lot of the only structures that we had access to was just our own freewheeling minds. Like that's why it was so prominent in Greece, certainly, but also Rome to a degree, is that what those people were doing was just like building these like logic machinations and structures and such. Like it created like a very powerful baseline that we still operate off of in a lot of degrees today.
Think of it this way: there's 7 hermetic principles, the 7 chakras, right? 7 days of the week, 7 colors in the rainbow.
Yeah. Yeah, 7 colors of the visible spectrum for sure. So many rules of 7. It gets pretty wild. Like plant life. Certainly Venus is very associated with 7 in the way that it interacts with the sun.
So there's 12 universal laws. All of the 7 hermetic principles are in those laws, so they just added on to the laws. But I mean, even though you could add to them, it's like at a point where it's almost like perfection,
Right.
you know? Which is, like I said, where the term hermetically sealed came from in science because of hermeticism.
Yeah.
Um,
I would think that Hermeticism wouldn't necessarily use the term perfection per se, but more solution. And because of the way that they would apply logic to any given situation, is that perfection would be a little synonymous with solution, is that the solution is
it means the seal. It's perfectly harmoniously sealed.
Yeah.
That's what the hermetically sealed means, basically.
Why we use that term, right, is that it is, as you said, perfectly and harmoniously sealed. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like necessarily so much concentration on the word of perfect. It's more like alchemy with the marriage, the union of two, the perfect union of two, right? So, which is like magic and science, which was beautifully shown in a Never-Ending Story with the 2 troll people, right? The old man and his wife.
Yeah. Yeah, the Never-Ending Story is entirely too visceral for me, even as a kid when I saw it. And I guess that it was all of like the closed head injuries that I had at a young age, is that I kind of was seeing through the veil, or I didn't get like a lot of the enjoyment that everybody else did because I was looking in the background as to what was really going on. And that movie is just so profoundly deep in terms of like esotericism and ritual that it just makes my head spin. Always freaked me out as a kid.
Well, what about the vaginas on the walls behind the goddess?
I didn't know what I was looking at the time as a kid, but I remember those images standing out to me and me being like, that's a really...
It was because it's representing the opening, the birth, right? And they did that on purpose. And it's, as a kid, you didn't notice it, but go back and watch it now and you'll be like, what?
Yeah. Just like going back to watch Gremlins and realizing how racist that movie is. Or going back and watching Ace Ventura and realizing how transphobic that movie is. Holy shit. Oh man. Anyways, like that's a fine point to get back to Hitler. I haven't been able to find the image. There's an actual photograph that I have seen before, and I swear the one that I had seen wasn't photoshopped. But this is Hitler, and I brought it up in a previous podcast, but I did find the illustration from the 1955. And so this is from some German publication talking about the very first hosting of the SS that they had held, is that Himmler demanded that Hitler go back to his birthplace, his town, and the actual room that he was born in, and to dig up a mandrake root and hang the thing around his neck. So you could see the depiction. It's kind of a crude drawing, but he's got this like little mangled midget baby. That's a mandrake root. Like as he's going, he's shaking Baker's hands. You know, he's shaking like war profiteers' hands, and he's got this little action figure that he's holding up to everybody, like, hey, yeah, this is Jerry. You know, he's gonna give me great power to take over the world. Like, holy God.
A very Pan's Labyrinth, huh?
Oh my God, yeah. And that actually was really powerful symbolism because it takes place in pretty much the same era. Although Pan's Labyrinth wasn't World War II, it was the Spanish Civil War, right?
Yeah.
And so that would have been, I can't even remember the timeline of the Spanish Civil War in lieu of World War II, but yeah. Yeah, I imagine that might be where Guillermo del Toro got the inspiration from.
Yeah, and if any of your viewers have seen that movie, you'll get the idea of what we're talking about with the Mandrake group. But I want to get back to the Lance of Longinus, the Spear of Destiny, and make an Evangelion reference because if you remember, that's how they held Lilith in that movie was
Right.
with the Lance of Longinus. But in the movies, so rumor had it is that Hitler did acquire the real Lance of Longinus, the Spear of Destiny. So for those of you who don't know, scripturally speaking, one of the Roman soldiers threw a spear at the Messiah when he was hanging up, strung upon the tree or the cross, whichever is the stake, however you choose to believe, um, and it pierced his ribs. So that's why you have in those.
Pontius Pilate. He was the Roman general, correct? And so
Yeah,
while
he's
Christ was
fine.
languishing on the tree or the cross, uh, Pontius Pilate pierced his side or his breast with that spear, the lance of Longinus. I say Longinus, you say Longinus. Um, and so at that point, being anointed in the blood of Christ became like this very powerful artifact.
Yeah,
It
and
seems
I've
to
heard.
be a real historical object too. Like I went down a deep dive years and years ago, right when I got into the esoteric archives, which again is a wonderful resource for anybody, esotericarchives.org or .com. You'd be able to Google it. And it seemed to me that not only was it an actual artifact, that the Nazis were in fact in possession of it to a time, and then it had been taken out from under their noses around their invasion of, and I'm drawing a blank as to the Russian town that they had got,
Oh, okay.
like, yeah, Stalingrad. Um, and that it had fallen out of their possession, and that it had then some years since found its way to the US and then had been used as an actual prop throughout Hollywood. You see the exact same prop that's used in Constantine as you do in Hellboy, as you do anytime that the thing is depicted.
Yeah, and that was the point I was going to make. That the rumor was that it ended up in Hollywood, which,
Yeah.
and obviously in Evangelion they made it look way different, but that's a whole different take on what the scriptures are, and definitely that's a mind fuck.
Yeah.
For those of you who haven't seen it, it's a really hard one to get through, but one of my favorites. It's very depressing.
Oh my God, yeah. And granted, the creator who was so deep in the Dead Sea Scrolls hung himself off a doorknob with a shoestring, which, as always, is the calling card of the Mossad. You could just
It's
think
true.
about how many people have hung themselves off a doorknob with a shoestring. It seems kind of wacky to me, but Evangelion is powerful because it uses the medium of anime, Japanese animation, but it talks about ideas in the current climate, the current id, and the current culture through the medium as the ideas itself. So where you see that, the Lance of Longinus that is containing Lilith at the, what do they call that? The terminal ego or whatever, is to where they have her bound, kind of in like a hollow earth or whatever. It's the something.
Yeah, but it's on the tree of life.
You're right, right, and she's bound on a cross, just at the foot of the Yggdrasil, the tree of life. But they make the lance itself look much more um,
Aggressive looking.
aggressive looking, and it's amorphous. It changes shape. It can be the size of a man. It can be the size of a god. It looks like the entwining of the helixes, like a DNA strand, because it's not really talking about any actual historical artifact. It's talking about the idea of what this is and the power that it contains and such, which is everything that Evangelion does. Although, man, that show is so repetitive. The original show it's like getting repeatedly punched on the bridge of your nose. Like, I get it. Holy God.
But the reason why it comes up a lot in here is that was the first thing this guy showed me when we met. So it has like a strong tie between the two of us and our relations to a lot of this esoteric. And
I showed you Evangelion.
yeah, remember I watched End of Evangelion with you before I ever watched the series or the first movie, Death and Rebirth. And I called out all this stuff that you were like, holy crap, how the hell? I didn't think you were going to get this.
Yeah. I do remember now. Like I always kind of forget who it is that I turned on to what, but you had only seen a handful of anime. Like you had maybe seen Akira or Ghost in the Shell or something, but I remember, yeah, it was a good couple of years of turning you on to everything that I was wise to, and Evangelion always stands out as the foremost.
Yeah.
Alex Jones
Go
talks
blow
about that shit all the time. He's like, it's fucking Neon Genesis Evangelion, Joe. Like, look it up. You got to watch that show. It's fucking amazing. It's the truth.
Yeah, but the creator, he also animated the Elemental in Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind.
Yep. The God Warrior. That was a powerful scene. It just doesn't do the books justice. For anybody that likes Hayao Miyazaki and has seen Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, the movie, then you absolutely have to go to your library or any way that you could get a hold of the actual book, because the movie is like 1/10 of 1% of what he describes throughout the book itself. Same thing with Akira. If you've seen Akira, the animation, the movie, then you got to read those comics, because they actually get into a real CIA program where they were experimenting with children and trying to bond their nervous system with like a saline mechanized mirror of like the brain patterns as they understood it at the time, which, spoiler alert, is in fact what created Akira in the first place.
Yeah.
Spoiler. I just ruined it for so many people. I know Leonardo DiCaprio really wants to make a live action movie, and it's like, just stop, bro. Like, make a Titanic 2 or something where it's just you floating in the ocean for 3 hours.
Canada.
Yeah, man, I think about that bike every day. God,
Yeah.
I love that bike. It's such a good show.
And I had that dog, Canada, because of that show.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's certainly something that we lost, which is very dangerous in terms of Nazi history and the Die Glocka, all of the programs that they had into esoterrorism, all of the investigations that they took into foreign ancient countries like Tibet or South America. They actually had interest, and they're beginning to find evidence of Nazi presences around Guatemala, seemingly that they were interested in a lot of the things that Dick Cheney himself were interested in, like the Jade Tablets, the Lost Book of Enki, or any of that, is the way that they propagandize. And like we were saying earlier, in terms of duality and polarity, and how good and evil are just different temperatures or different vibrations, is that the way that the Nazi regime really got off of the ground is the way that any grab of power is going to occur. And this is where fascism lives and resides, is that the way that the Nazi regime began the regime itself was via a tuberculosis scare in Germany. And so Hitler was actually really adept at creating mobile tuberculosis facilities, like basically food trucks, but for treating tuberculosis, all throughout Germany. It was like one of the very first things that they had done. And then obviously with like a virulent contaminant or something within any society, neighbors start looking at neighbors, and then just like with the Reichstag fire, you create like the sacrificial goat. And in this regard, the way that they ginned up any hatred for the Jews, for the gypsies, the Roma, for the homosexual, for the drag queens, whatever, never really pointed their eyes towards people of Middle Eastern descent or black people as much. Like they kind of left that one alone, which is very interesting, considering that in our American culture we go about it in quite an opposite way in a lot of regards. And so they pointed the finger as to who it was that was responsible for this sickness, and then everything else is history as we know it. But it always begins with like a massive power grab associated with some kind of virus or germ. And as we know, Hitler himself and the entire Nazi regime were very germophobic. They were probably more germophobic than they ever were xenophobic, because they couldn't differentiate between the two.
So let's get into that, what we were talking about before the podcast, like when I was telling you, okay, so prior to I guess having total control over the country, Hitler had already started a program where they were going to the mental institutions, and this is all because of a guy he met who was an Englishman, and I'm trying to think his name, it escapes me right now, but he believed that they were the Aryan race, the Germans who had the blonde hair, blue eyes. And that's what ended up leading Hitler down his road and wanting to quest more into eugenics and the eugenics program. So he started with the mental hospitals, and they started killing people in the gas chambers, and they were also sterilizing people. So the part I didn't know doing this research was the part where they were killing the people in the mental hospitals. They were trying to wipe out, they said, 1 in every 5 people would cleanse the German race. And when they reached 90,000, somebody had told Hitler that that's enough, and he stopped immediately. But at that point, when they stopped executing people in the mental hospitals, that's when he had his generals and Heinrich Himmler and stuff rebuild the concentration camps to house gas chambers, and they continued the gassing there.
That was the very first time that they had begun implementing Zyklon B as that gas was in the mental hospitals, is what you're saying. And every time that you bring up that history, all I could think about is Ronald Reagan when he completely destroyed like all of our mental health institutions in the U.S. It's almost as though um, Aldous Huxley's father or son, I can't remember, but one of them had said at like a Bilderberg meeting way back in the day, this was back just after World War II, if not almost immediately after World War II, he was quoted as saying that we need to make the impossible possible again. And what he meant by that was saying that we need to get this eugenics program going. We just can't execute it as overtly as Nazi Germany did. And so when you see the kinds of things that certainly Ronald Reagan, but a lot of US presidents after have done, is that it's almost like the institutions that they create the law and the policies for is almost like a Hitlerian Nazi energy. It's just that you don't see it because all you see is the figurehead. The damage that Ronald Reagan did to mental health in the United States in terms of like closing down untold numbers of facilities and such for taking care of people, you see the results today in terms of homelessness. Like the echoes that those sorts of things have on civilization are just absolutely insane. Whereas, the Nazis were just killing them wholesale and then also creating the foundation for the concentration camps, which of course everybody knows today and can't talk shit about. You want to debate about numbers and get lost in the minutia, go fuck yourself. Like we know that this kind of a thing occurred. If it were 3 people, that's too many. If it were 300 million people, that's obviously too many. If it was 6 million, as we're told, fine. Like you're losing in the minutia of just the mathematics of it and not realizing how monstrous a concept that is, mentally ill people or otherwise.
So I want to kind of take it back to the bell because we mentioned it earlier and get into the Philadelphia experiments. So this is all going to be speculatory, basically. I mean, it's really hard to prove or disprove. I mean, there are instances of this ship manifesting. We do know that there was something kind of bell found in Pennsylvania. Again, I can't remember the year right now, but my belief is that the bell that they found may or may not have contained some members of that Vril Society. And through them, with that bell, and combining their technologies with Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein, help produce the Philadelphia experiments. Now, speculatively, the Philadelphia experiments were us trying to manifest or teleport, I guess, a naval battleship to another area through teleportation. Adam knows a little bit more about this subject.
It was a very pointed concept that they had, and it's been a while since I thought about it. But yeah, the Philadelphia experiment really interested me since middle school. And it was always around Halloween that my middle school would allow us to get into like real woo-woo kind of awesome, spooky stories. And the Philadelphia experiment always stood out. It wasn't that they were, oh, that's what it was. They weren't trying to work with anything on a quantum level because that just wasn't hip in terms of the science community back in the day. It was something that we had maybe only just barely pierced via occultism and esoterrorism. And so a lot of those people just got written off as kooks and couldn't find any funding for the project. What it was that they were trying to do is referred to, if I recall correctly, as degaussing. And gaussing it's like a magnetic process of demagnetizing an object. And so what they were trying to do with this one particular ship was effectively, if not demagnetize it, then degaussing it, which would mean that it would no longer have a footprint within the magnetosphere that could be detected by a sonar. It was supposed to make, what's that?
Like, would you say it was kind of like a dematerialization?
Well, no, they really were just thinking about hitting something with a magnet to make it invisible. to any kind of detecting technology. So with sonar, they would send like a sonar residual out, and it wouldn't register on that kind of a device, right? Because it would be degaussed, demagnetized as to be invisible. What it was that they had done instead is that, and this is all, again, like you were saying, completely speculative, is that when they degaussed its magnetic valence within our own magnetosphere and the way that we're able to interact with things and detect them via sonar, via radar, via whatever, it seemed to go turtles all the way down to a molecular level, and it actually bamped the thing not only out of the magnetosphere, but out of the very polarity of the vibration of atomic structures and such. And because it was such an unexpected result that they had absolutely not planned for whatsoever, is that it shifted this one ship, well, it was in Philadelphia. I can't remember the name of the ship. It's a word that sounds very esoteric itself. It sounds like something, the guy that wrote the
I thought
Cosmic
it was
War.
the U.S. Philadelphia, or did it just happen in Philadelphia?
It started in Philadelphia, but then the ship wound up off the coast of like North Carolina or something.
Yeah.
I just got to look it up here.
Well, and
But
wasn't
the
the
ship
rumor
itself
that
sounds like a very cosmic horror sort of a word. And I always forget what it is because it sounds very close to what's the name of the guy that writes all the Eldridge, the USS Eldridge, which sounds like Eldritch, right?
yeah,
It was the
Eric,
USS Eldridge, and the book. This is even Wikipedia. Usually they say, they'll say conspiracy theory or whatever. They do say origins of the story, but it's an alleged event claimed to have been witnessed by an ex-merchant mariner named Carl M. Allen at the United States Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, sometime around October 28th, 1943. Hey, happy birthday, fucking Philadelphia Project. I didn't even realize. Um, the U.S. Navy attempt to render invisible the destroyer escort, the USS Eldridge, and the bizarre results that followed. So and this is where even the fact checkers get it wrong, is that nobody was ever claiming on the scientific project that they were trying to de facto turn it visually invisible. What they were trying to do was to make it invisible to any devices that could detect it, again, like radar, LiDAR, whatever kind of magnetic,
the
what
rumor
they have.
Tesla coils on the ship, right?
That I Let's see if I could find anything about that. I'm sure that
And
they were using like some really incredible power sources and whatnot.
the rumor also, and this is all again speculative, is that people were fused to the ship hull and the
When they
floor and the
phased, yeah,
walls.
because the idea is that they broke the atomic structure. Like all of atomic structure is held together with a certain kind of magnetism. Um, so obviously you're going to get like a lot of movie references and such, which is fun. But maybe that one has Tesla coils.
Not
And
they use
so when
coil.
everything was in flux, the idea that people were fusing to it is that the solid structure of the atomic vibrations between matter, right? They were so in flux that when it reappeared in North Carolina and then disappeared and reappeared again back in Philadelphia is when they said that they saw crew members fused to bulkheads and everything, is that the way that it teleported and disassociated itself in its space time and then appeared in another, it was so in flux that people would just sink into the thing as though it were a piece of clay.
So I was under the impression they were using the Einstein's theory of relativity with the Tesla coils and somehow harnessing.
Here's a fun image. I got to remember what movie this is. Like I can't imagine it's the more prominent one. Damn it, where did that image go?
To be honest, this reminds me of that movie. We always talk about it. What's it called? Where they take the ship through hell?
Oh yeah, Event Horizon.
Yep, that
Yeah,
movie.
yeah. And so Event Horizon is one of the scariest horror films ever and is absolutely inspired by the Philadelphia experiment.
Yeah, because as we're
Grappling
talking
without
about
moving.
it in the
Yeah.
rumor,
People all fused into it and shit.
yeah, as we're
Oh, no,
talking.
you can say it here. Reminds me of the movie Event Horizon. That's funny.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'm saying that, because as we're talking about this, it's just like that's all I visualize is that
Right.
movie.
Right. Where we're going, we don't need eyes. Yeah, Die Glocka, Die Glocka, all of these esoteric dealings that we have is you would have to wonder as to why this technology was ever developed to its pinnacle realization as to why we don't have more sightings of quote unquote UFOs today. Although at the same time, it could be that every UFO sighting that we've had is in fact some remnant of the Vril Society or otherwise, where they really are flying these things down, and we just write it off as little green men because we can't know about the existence of these societies. Um, it seems argumentatively that that might not be the case on account of the fact that drone technology has just blown up via leaps and bounds. The things that we're able to do with basic drones, you could fly a person around with drones now. I think that they have recently developed a way to build a drone system that could carry like shipping containers full of whatever kind of products or what have you. It just seems like it would be a way more efficacious way, or it could also be that at the heart of the Die Glocka, the mercurial core, is that there might have been some other result in using that sort of technology that maybe even resulted in something akin to the Philadelphia experiment that was otherwise unforeseen as to why everybody disappeared. These bells, these cast iron bells that were all one solid piece.
Well, I guess we could say thanks to the Brill Society, we have things like Disney parks. We have rockets that NASA uses. There's the government.
NASA, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
We
all of that fun
things
stuff in
wouldn't
terms of
exist.
engineering and velocity for sure.
Yeah, because some of the scientists that came over through Operation Paperclip had said that they built the rides at Disney parks.
I don't doubt it at all. I mean, the level of engineering that you would need is just so massive and was such a breakthrough at the time in terms of like leisure and whatnot. And also, I harkens back to what Hunter S. Thompson was saying in the movie or the book when he's like, this is what the Third Reich would be doing had they won the war, is that that type of leisure is a very German concept, I think, when it comes to amusement parks, right? Like it is the height, the pinnacle of engineering for everybody to enjoy. Like the idea of living in their Aryan utopia or whatever the end result was. Like it is a very, and like you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, is that it's a very wholesome and pleasurable kind of leisure to be involved in. Talking about the engineering point, one of the things that kept crossing my mind is when you said that the Die Glocka, the UFO bell itself, was one solid piece. There's a little bit of logic to that, saying that if it were able to maintain velocities in a given direction, abruptly stop, and then change course immediately, change course, change velocity, then it would have to be one piece. If you have like a bunch of bolts and nails holding the thing together, it's going to shear the whole thing fucking apart.
Yeah.
So having it cast out of like one single die would make a hell of a lot more sense, is that anything else is just going to get torn to shit. Maybe what happened to the first experimental pilots,
So
speculatively.
I seen drawings before, and I don't remember where they were. I think it was on a documentary on History Channel where they were talking about the Glocka, and not the one I watched recently, but it's a long time ago. But it was with the anti-gravitational technology, and they were more or less talking about that and the Foo Fighters. So in this drawing, it had three discs at the bottom of this bell-shaped thing, and the disc, ideally, we're gonna put out an anti-gravitational energy, right, from 3 points on this bell, and that would generate um, kind of like a shield, an AT field around this, and
Generate
not
lift and
around this orb to help it move, because you got to think that if you're breaking the space-time continuum, which exists simultaneously, then if you're not protected within this bell, we couldn't travel in it at the state we are, right? That's what Einstein said, because our physical forms couldn't handle it. Now, theoretically, if we were protected in an orb, right, there's a possibility, according to that study on the documentary I had seen, that they were saying that us in our physical forms as we are, we could be protected against those G forces, essentially.
It'd be like the eye of a hurricane, which also factors into what it was that Tesla was doing here in Colorado Springs in his warehouse, is that he created that machine, whatever it was, he was working with a unified field theory, I think, at the time, and he turned on this machine and everything was honky dory in the eye of the storm around the machine. The inside of the warehouse was fine. Some onlooker rushed in from the street and told him to get out of the building because it was disintegrating. And so everything outside of that calm of the eye of the storm was getting obliterated by whatever kind of valence or I want to say currency, voltage or whatever was generating outside of that pocket. If you remember that story, you could actually go down to the
Yeah,
warehouse today, and they still have some of those towers, those Nikolai Tesla coil towers in Colorado Springs at the
yeah, the
facility that he worked
Gordon
at.
towers.
Yeah.
He was, I think he was commissioned to build like 10 or 12 of them, wasn't he, or more than that? And
Yeah.
J. Morgan cut the funding when he realized he was trying to give free energy,
Yeah.
which at this point we could be walking and our feet touching the ground would be charging any electronic device you had on you because you'd be grounded. Is the idea of what he was trying to give us with those Warden towers.
Yeah, I got them pulled up here.
But then you had Edison going around shocking the hell out of elephants and stuff, trying to disprove electricity and scare people away from Tesla's theories.
Poor Stampy the elephant. Oh my God. No, I thought that the point of him electrocuting that poor elephant was to prove that his electricity was safe. And it did in fact just electrocute poor old Stampy the elephant to death. There's a Bob's Burgers episode that does it like the ultimate justice. It's the most incredible thing I've ever seen, where the kids are doing a play about how much of a bastard Thomas Edison was, which the science teacher doesn't like at all. And so the science teacher is saying that the kids can't do it because it's like, oh, you're an enemy of science, and they wind up doing it anyways.
So
They
this
get
might be a pure speculation, but since we still have some in the Springs, rumor has it. I haven't personally seen them going down there. I've always wanted to, but one of the guys who grew up in the Springs I knew, he said they're still down there. But I'm speculating here. Do you think that it's possible they could be using those to power NORAD?
I mean, you would have to imagine. Oh, it was Topsy the elephant, not Stampy the elephant. I got that one wrong. 1903. So was that the one that they were putting to death, or it was yeah, I can't remember. I would have to imagine that NORAD has got so many redundant protocols in places that they've got gas, diesel, natural gas generators. They've got solar cells. They've got probably hard lines to generators that we're not even aware of. I wouldn't doubt it for a second that they have some kind of a backup that we're not familiar with, something that could have been Tesla like. Um, and I never knew this until I was dating a woman that was in the National Guard. And when I was talking to her about NORAD, she was like, which one? And I says to her, I'm like, what do you mean, which one? The only one, the one that's in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs, right? And she's like, no. Every single state has, if not just one NORAD, states can have multiple NORADs. It's just that the main hub is the one at Cheyenne Mountain. That was the one that Maynard and I at his folks' house out in Elizabeth. We could be standing out there, granted, high as kites on mushrooms or smoking doobies or whatever, but they have a closed circuit train track near the summit of the mountain where they have armed guards that like watch anybody's approach to the facility 24/7. And you could see the lights on that train just slowly creeping around the mountain.
Or I wouldn't
Saw
doubt it.
so many weird lights in the skies. Like we definitely saw some aurora-like phenomena in the skies. And again, we were high on mushrooms, but it was a shared experience, and it seemed like there was some kind of an energy or experiments going on, something not unlike HARP in Alaska, where they have that umbilicus tower where they generate a fuck ton of energy into the ionosphere. HARP is a system where they generate this umbilicus of energy into the ionosphere so that they could better understand exactly what the ionosphere is and what it does.
Is
And the
it in
horrifying thing about that is that they could pop that bubble and we just get cooked by the sun instantaneously.
Because remember, there's one in Germany, and they did it to create better weather around their facility or something for some reason, and it ended up causing rain down the way, and they were told they can't use that machine at certain times because it screwed up the farmers or something.
Yep.
But I was gonna bring it back to I wanted to know if you could look up the city. It starts with the P, where they were developing weaponry for the Wunderwaffe, because it has to do with von Braun, and I believe at this point is where America gained the technology we needed to complete the nuclear bomb, because it was pan something. Anyways, when we bombed there, I was telling Adam about it before. We bombed where all the German scientists were said to have been housed at, because we were trying to stop all the projects on the Wunderwaffe.
You're not talking about Prague, are you?
No,
Okay.
it's pan something Panza. I can't think of it. I was listening to documentaries about it, 2 or 3 of them, and they mentioned it. So where we found there is we found a nuclear reactor, and in the field outside of the factory, we found Iranian cubes, and we also took their heavy water, which is taking some kind of element, starts with the D, and mixing it with water, and it's the key ingredient to power a nuclear reactor. And it was said that they were trying to rush through that to create a nuclear bomb, and Hitler was in the belief that the Germans were going to create it first. But once we took that, it's saying that the lab, the Vril Society were at, and the projects they were making, it never recovered after that, after we took their nuclear reactor and their heavy water and uranium, which rumor has it among other weapons that we took. And so this ended up at Los Alamos, where I believe that it was the keys needed to finish our nuclear bomb.
Yeah, you would have to imagine that something like the nuclear bomb would have been such a global agenda that you wouldn't just be able to do it under the guise of one state. Is that it really is like such a monstrous concept that it would take so many vastly different perspectives. I have no problem believing that we incorporated aspects of what the Nazis were onto. They incorporated what we were onto, and then lo and behold, yeah, I'm not seeing anything associated with a P word site as to where the Wunderwaffe program was. Ultimately, we're just going to have to open like a breakfast joint and call it the Wonder Waffle, I think. That'd be pretty fantastic. Um, yeah, nothing there. I think I'm looking at the Missile Museum in Kansas that I played disc golf on. So they have a park, like an outdoor park, like a Washington Park in Kansas, and they have a disc golf course on it. But they have like a whole bunch of fuselage and whatnots of rockets that you're playing amongst, and it's like this is really fun for the whole family, y'all. Like, yeah, look at that weapon of mass fucking destruction. Hey, go get on all those shots.
So ultimately, that catastrophe for the scientists is what ended up leading Werner von Braun to join the U.S. allied troops, I guess, and submit to them, as opposed to the Russians taking his team with him and going on to found NASA, where he died serving our country as an American hero. Or so, I mean, that's what they want us to believe, the narrative. I mean, who's to say what way or another? Again, um, I mean, it's a hard, touchy subject, right? Because
The very idea of Project Paperclip is kind of interesting, and I think it's sort of a wholesome concept for Americans to consider. Is that there isn't a lot of discussion about inducting the evil into our own empire. As post World War II, we became the empire. And it's something you could see day to day as evidenced for it. Is that imagine another country, if you were visiting China today and you saw that every major building or even small business had a Chinese flag flying on the roof. You don't really see that in any other country. Maybe in Germany around the time of like an Oktoberfest, will you see like a lot of German flags and such. But if you were in a foreign country and you saw such a thing, you would immediately think fascist empire. But it's true in America. Everywhere you go, you see us like flying our own flags and whatever. And we don't really give it a second's thought. And I think that it's a wholesome concept that people acknowledge Project Paperclip because they could see that although these were Nazi scientists that probably developed weapons of mass destruction and genocide and evil and pain and whatnot. The idea is that once we inducted them, well, then they were just the adept scientists that we were able to induct their prowess into our very own empire. Um, I kind of go the other way, is that I don't think that the whole of, I guess that the ideology of Nazism is, as we know historically, to be 1,010% evil, but to be able to induct any of the perspectives and knowledge that some of the underlings had and such wouldn't necessarily be 100% evil. It is evil to say just following orders. That's evil by definition. And though a lot of these people, when they realized what they had done, they couldn't reconcile the evils that they had committed.
But when you have a gun to your head too, your decision making might be a little different. And I'm not saying that. And I guess the point was that we're making is that without being there in that moment, it's hard for anyone to say what was going on in their heads and what they did and why they did it. And then maybe there are the sickos that were doing their experiments for the pure satisfaction of hurting others. And
Yeah.
there's the ones who were forced into it. And then it's really, that's why I say it's a hard subject to talk about, because it's hard to know and you can't really take a stance on either side or you're a bad guy, right, Adam?
Oh yeah, yeah. And so obviously you have like the Himmlers and the Goebbels and what's the name of the doctor? Mengele. Mengele was definitely just getting his rocks off. But modern medicine would not be what it is today without the things that Mengele had discerned via wholesale torture of his patients. Like this guy was really just a butcher, and they gave him wholesale access to everything that he could ever possibly want to further Western medicine and whatnot. Any doctor will tell you today, like, had it not been for the monstrosities that Joseph Mengele had committed, we'd not be nearly as advanced as we are now, the way that we understand things, because of his lack of fucking empathy and morality and shit. I personally believe that with Project Paperclip, a lot of that esoteric knowledge got absorbed as well. And I think that a lot of that knowledge is now being executed by the acronyms here in the States, be it the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, in terms of, these are supposed to be outwardly looking institutions, but what they actually do is all about social control. Every single one of the acronyms is all about controlling the empire. It's very CCP kind of a process that they have of, as whichever Huxley it was, be it the son or the father of Aldous, had said, we need to make the impossible possible again.
Yeah, the alphabet soups.
Yep, exactly. Like, just name me one. I mean, the very fact that Google itself, don't be evil initially, they had to change their name to Alphabet or ABC or whatever, just because, like, people got fed up with their all-seeing eye.
Yeah.
I'm on Safari.
So, Tim Kennedy, right? He's a Green Beret, and shout out Tim Kennedy, and a UFC fighter. He was doing a documentary on the History Channel. I don't know how far they got into it, but he's looking for Hitler, right? Is what I think it was called. And he's going down to the colonias and stuff and trying to do investigations. But again, like I said, when you go down there, you're not allowed to walk around without an escort. You're not allowed into certain areas. These people speak more German than they do the languages where they're at, and that's in Argentina.
Venezuela?
Chile.
In Chile?
Yeah, in Argentina. The colonias, there's a few of them, isn't there? And I'm wondering if Mengele made it there as well, as rumor would have it, because I thought he was conducting experiments there.
I mean, it very well could be. I mean, I think that Mengele was just everybody's boy in terms of what he was able to accomplish, that he probably had such protections and such, like dead man switches and everything just to protect himself.
Well, because I believe, isn't there some kind of genocide happened there too, where the colonias were?
Yeah. Which Argentinian cities feel the most European? I'm trying to find images because I've seen a lot of their holidays and stuff that they do down there, and it's incredibly interesting. Is that you will see Dutch-esque architecture in the middle of Tovar Colony. That's an interesting lead. Although that was established in 1843. That's wild. So it seems like they've been immigrating over to South America as early as 1843.
Well, I think that's why they had a network already established that they could already sneak over to.
An underground, yeah, for sure. That's
And
interesting. I mean, they definitely knew their shit. Who doesn't want to go to South America? I do.
so with the Aurelia, I guess we talked about this a little bit. Um, they believe they were from Atlantis. I've heard rumors that I think they're more from the Hollow Earth, right? Or at least they're there. The light beings that we talked about before that have the futuristic technology.
Yeah.
And through that, I think that's why Hitler even had an interest in Antarctica in the first place, through connecting with the Brill Society and him being into the occult and learning about the Brillia. I'm sure that gave him reason to want to go down to Antarctica and, in fact, discover if there is a civilization down there. And so the pyramid I was talking to you about that I thought was the Nazi base. I mean, what if it isn't a Nazi base, like I mentioned to you before we started the podcast? And what if it was like the Brillia's temple covered by ice?
Or that's another page that I could pull up in Hellboy. I think it is the Conquering Worm where they talk about um, the Hyperborean age, and that was the age, the golden age of man, and the ultimate empire was in what is now Antarctica, covered in ice. Obviously, these are all going to be History Channel and whatnot, but it's very very interesting looking. I just wish that I could find some higher quality
But
images.
how interesting it is that Mike Mignola took and he molded his stories around what happened during the events of World War II, and he has Rasputin in it, which is strong ties to the Tartarian Empire.
Oh,
Since
completely.
the,
Yeah. I mean, the two were almost like inseparable, really.
yeah,
And that's what I'm saying is that you could go down a rabbit hole of just following the breadcrumbs that Mike Mignola leaves and get into some real interesting and fun shit. Let me see if I could pull that back up.
remember when they did in Hellboy what was it, the troll market?
Yeah.
Dude, that's just like what I've seen in books and stuff. We've
Yeah.
talked about it before, just the way he designs things.
Thankfully, I have my physical copy that I can refer to while I look up images for the screen share, so I don't have to do it the goofy way. But yeah, they get into Hyperborea having been the golden age of man. I think it's the last thing that Rasputin says before his soul is almost completely shattered in the end. Let's see here. God, I love having a physical copy of this book. Like, it just pops off the page, folks. Like Mike Mignola's illustrations and storytelling are just so vibrant and alive.
Lobster Johnson.
Yeah, yeah, he's definitely one of my favorites. No, it's not at the end. I guess it's when he tells his Nazi woman familiar about what it is that they're trying to do is reduce man back to another golden age. If that is the plague of frogs.
The comics do it way more justice than the movies. For those of you who haven't seen or haven't read the comics, it's definitely, the stories are way more in depth.
Yeah. And I mean, they both have their place. The movies are lovely. Like the movie,
Yeah.
I mean, the one with David Harbour, I love that guy, and he really gave it his all. But man, they fucked him so hard. But the Guillermo del Toro movies they're great. Um, they're just not anywhere near the source material. Like, there's no way to capture the source material in any other way than how Mignola did it. I guess it isn't in the Conquering Worm. That's fucked. Anyways, another one of his titles. I'm trying to think of which one it would be, talking about
One
Hyperborea.
with Satchel
No, the Conqueror Worm, the one you're
or
thinking of is
Samael.
Seed of Destruction is the first one, and it could be Seed of Destruction. I
Yeah.
guess that when Rasputin gets a hold of Hellboy and tells him about his origin, that's what he's talking about, the ancient age of man
Yeah.
or stranger places. It's one of those, to be sure. I've always been absolutely obsessed with Antarctica and ancient civilizations and everything, saying that Antarctica would have been the cradle of the civilization. We just can't reveal it since it's since been covered in ice. And Travis and I, fucking old picture plane, he and I had that shared experience. One of the first times that he and I even had a conversation is that we remembered having seen a CNN broadcast It would have been sometime around 2002, 2003, but we both saw the same CNN podcast saying that ancient ruins discovered in Antarctica. And this single pyramid was so massive that it was basically like a fraction the size of the moon. But then at the base of the pyramid, you saw like very Indonesia looking stone structures outside of it, and then a wall of ice that all of it kind of persisted out of. And he and I had a very, very clear recollection that was, it completely verified the other's experience. I haven't seen this on a TV. I was at a bar eating potato skins and I don't know, like tater tots or something. And he had seen it on his TV at home. And he immediately had wanted to record it on VHS. And the moment passed and he missed it. I didn't have that opportunity. We didn't have even camera phones at the time. Like I didn't even have a pager at the time. I had a pager. I didn't even have a cell phone at the time. So we're not able to capture this and there's no record of it.
So
just another one of those confirmation biases, I guess, is that he and I had the same dream or we had the same reality. It's hard to say.
I'm thinking this is a really well-rounded podcast right here. What do you think, Adam? You got anything else on it, on the subject?
Yeah, like I think that there's just so many fun rabbit holes to go around. I mean, we got into so many different subjects and branched out from the core of, like Nazi occultism and technology and the way that it's used and perceived and everything. It's a great place to stop. The one thing that I'll say is that as I'm trying to record this on Spotify, it has an hour limit. So at one point it was mid-sentence for you. I try to time it appropriately, but there will be a little bit of a gap in the Spotify recording. So maybe we'll just do like a fun little aside or something like a nice little jingle, and then have it in between there like, hey, sorry for the technical difficulties and wibbity bibbity, here we go again.
So Lane, I hope that we kind of researched or talked about what you were looking forward to. Like Adam said, there's so much on the subject as we were looking it up. We're like, this has to be more than one podcast in reality because there's so much technology they create. I mean, we didn't even get into the Horton Ho 229, which inspired the B-52 bomber, and other weaponry they developed. And even as we're researching it, we're just trying to pick and choose the weaponry we wanted to talk about to kind of hint at the type of technology they were creating. I mean, it's infinite because his weapons program, the Wunderwaffe program, Hitler wanted quantity over quality. So if it had one failed attempt, they moved on. So there's so much technology out there. And it's why the Die Glocka, the bell, has so much, I guess, mystery surrounding it because we only have the blueprints. There's not an actual physical evidence other than what was reported being seen in Pennsylvania as being the bell. So
yeah, it's such a romantic and beautiful image of a bell, which is very synonymous with German culture. As if you follow Blueprint for Armageddon, Dan Carlin's deep dive of World War One, and the imagery of the bell. It's a very beautiful, beautiful sounding, beautiful appearance, something that resonates deeply within people, as much as the resonance of the ringing itself is so much associated with the silent horror of German and Nazi machinations.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, once again, hit us up in the comments and we will do everything that we can. I know that Delane and I, if we're throwing episodes out, just know that we're going to be working behind the scenes to really do a proper deep dive on this subject. Is that we only scratched the surface as to how many aspects there are that interest us. We didn't even get into not Hermes Trismegistus, and not Aldous Huxley, but the other guy that
Alex
was Crowley. We didn't even touch base with how tied that guy was to the Germans in World War I versus the Nazi regime in World War II. And that's absolutely something that we could do an entire episode on right there.
Yeah, and do a whole episode on Aleister Crowley, actually, because, I mean, there's a lot to talk about with the guy.
Oh, yeah. Anyhow, we love y'all. Thanks for listening. And again, anybody drops us comments, we'll throw you an episode as to any subjects that interest us. And yeah.
Bye, guys.
Adios.